Chapter 1. Not on Fire. Leopold Fairfax had exactly 4 minutes until he stopped being the most dangerous thing in the county, and he intended to spend them yelling at a tire. "The jack does not fit," Wendell said, on his knees in the gravel, dawn-gray light already climbing the east side of the sky. "I have tried it 4 ways. It does not fit this car." "Then find a car it fits." "There is no other car. There is this car, and a torn sidewall, and 31 miles between us and the house, and in—" Wendell checked his watch with the specific horror of a man reading a bomb timer. 3 minutes and 40 seconds? You are going to become a mortal man on the shoulder of a public road outside a town called Millhaven, and I would very much like that to happen somewhere with a roof. You could simply change the tire faster. I could simply have you not need me to change a tire at 4 in the morning on the one day of the year timing is not a suggestion. But here we are. This was the part of the year Leopold hated most. Not the day itself, which he had survived 300 times in 300 different miserable ways, but the last few minutes before it, when he was still himself and already grieving it. "Leave," he said. "Take the good wheel. Find a garage, come back for me at nightfall." "I am not leaving you on a roadside." "You are leaving me on a roadside, Wendell. I am ordering it." "You will not be able to order anything in 2 minutes and 50 seconds. You will be a 30-year-old man with no wallet, no phone, and a face nobody in this town has any reason to trust." "Then give me the wallet." Wendell, without looking up from the useless jack, reached into his coat and pressed a slim leather billfold into Leopold's hand. $11 and a folded card that would do him no good without a phone to pair it to. But a wallet nonetheless. 3 centuries of a servant's precise, joyless competence distilled into a single object, handed over without being asked twice. "There is a fold-out map of the county in the second pocket," Wendell added, "and a card with the house address on it in case you forget it. Which you will, because you always do." "I have never once forgotten the address." "You forgot it in 1958. You told a very confused milkman you lived at the good house, the one with the roof." Leopold looked east. The gray was going gold at the edges. He had felt this particular dread 300 times, and it had never once gotten easier. The vertigo of watching his own unmaking arrive on schedule, punctual as a tax. "Go," he said. "That is an order I still have the authority to give, for approximately 90 more seconds. Use them wisely." Wendell went, tires spitting gravel, taillights shrinking down the empty road, already dialing someone on a phone that would be useless to Leopold in 3 minutes' time. Leopold stood alone at the edge of a town he had never heard of and watched the sun come up. It didn't burn. It never did, on this one morning of the year. That was the joke the curse had always saved for last. 300 years of flinching from sunrise like a man flinching from a blade he knows perfectly well won't fall today, because today it never does. He still flinched. Old fear didn't need permission to keep showing up on time. Something happened in his chest instead. One hard, unfamiliar knock, and then another, and then a rhythm he hadn't felt from the inside in 3 centuries. He put a hand flat against his sternum, astonished every single time, exactly as astonished as the last 299. "Oh," he said to the empty road, "there it is." By the time he'd walked the mile of dark storefronts into what appeared to be the entire commercial district of Millhaven, a hardware store, a shuttered insurance office, a church, and a bakery with its lights already on, he had catalogued the full inventory of indignities the day planned to inflict on him. His shoes hurt. He had never known shoes could hurt. He had simply never worn a pair long enough on legs that got tired. His mouth was dry in a way that had nothing to do with hunger for blood and everything to do with a rasping, stupid thirst he didn't know how to interpret. He had, at one point, needed to sit on a low wall for close to a minute because his legs had simply declined to keep going. An experience so novel and so undignified that he had looked around twice to make sure no one had witnessed a king being defeated by his own knees. And underneath his ribs, insistent, embarrassing, was a low ache that took him nearly 10 minutes to identify as ordinary human hunger, the kind that came from an empty stomach, not from 3 centuries of appetite for something else entirely. The bakery had a bell over the door. He heard it before he understood he'd walked into it. The woman behind the counter didn't look up right away. She was elbow-deep in a tray of something that smelled like burnt sugar and better decisions than he'd made in the last 4 minutes. And when she finally did look up, she took him in with the flat, unhurried assessment of someone who had already decided, long before he arrived, that nothing that walked through that door before 6 in the morning was going to surprise her. He surprised her. "We're not open," she said. Then, looking at him more carefully, "You okay?" He did not know how to answer that question. He had not been asked it in longer than this town had existed. "I am experiencing," he said, with the precise, formal caution of a man translating from a language he no longer entirely trusted, an unusual number of things simultaneously. She set down the tray, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked at him the way he would learn. She looked at everything that came through that door before it made sense, patiently, and with the clear intention of making it make sense eventually. Such as, "My legs stopped working correctly. My mouth is dry. There is a smell in this room that I would, under different circumstances, describe as a moral failing, because I want to put my face directly into it, and I have never once wanted to do that with food before." "That's hunger, buddy. Sit before you fall down. You look like you've never seen bread before." He sat. He looked at the bread, a rack of it, gold and split-topped and radiating a heat he could feel from 4 feet away, which was itself strange because heat had not troubled him from any distance in 300 years, and understood, with the particular vertigo of a man rediscovering a language he had once spoken fluently, that he was looking at it the way a starving man looks at anything. "What is your name?" he said, because it seemed important suddenly, in a way names rarely seemed important to him. "Pearl." She was already cutting a slice off something still steaming, buttering it with the brisk economy of a woman who fed people for a living and had never once needed a reason. "Sutton. You want to tell me yours, or is this a whole mysterious stranger thing?" "Leopold," he said. And then, because it had been so long since anyone had used the shortened version that he'd nearly forgotten it existed, "Leo, if you like." "Leo. Okay, Leo. Before I feed you, I've got to ask, because I run a small business, and I've been burned before. You got money, or is this a whole other situation?" He produced Wendell's wallet with as much composure as a man could manage, while producing a wallet he had never held before. $11. $11 gets you the day-old rack, not the fresh one. I would be grateful for whichever rack you consider appropriate to a man with $11, and, I am beginning to suspect, no functional understanding of what any of it is worth. Something about the phrasing caught her, a flicker of real curiosity crossing the professional patience, and she slid the plate across the counter to him anyway, the fresh one, not the day-old rack, like this was a completely normal transaction, like he hadn't clearly just walked out of a ditch. "Eat that before you say anything else weird. We'll figure out the $11 later." He ate it. He would think about that first bite, on and off, for longer than he was prepared to admit to anyone, ever, including himself. Chapter 2. The Tip Jar. By 7, Millhaven's population appeared to be entirely composed of people who wanted a croissant and had opinions about the man behind the counter helping Pearl fold boxes. "New hire?" asked a man in a reflective vest, not quite quietly enough. "Emergency labor," Pearl said without looking up from the register. "His car broke down. He owed me for a slice of babka. This is how I collect." This was, broadly, true, in the sense that Leopold had discovered somewhere around 6:40 that $11 did not, apparently, buy a second slice of babka, a fact Pearl had informed him of with the specific patience of a woman explaining currency to a toddler. "You could work it off," she'd said. "I need someone who can lift the flour sacks without complaining about his back." "You complain about your back yet?" "I don't believe I have a back that complains." "Great, you're hired. Minimum wage is bread, take it or leave it." I accept your terms. You don't have to say it like we're signing a border treaty. I have signed border treaties with less deliberation than this negotiation required. That says more about your treaties than my bread. So he had spent the last 20 minutes learning to fold pastry boxes, a task that should have been beneath him and was, instead, infuriatingly, fascinatingly difficult. His hands, which had not fumbled anything in 300 years, fumbled the cardboard 4 times before Pearl reached over without comment and showed him the fold, her fingers moving with the specific economy of 10,000 repetitions. "You're doing the thing where you overthink it," she said. "It's a box. It's not a treaty." "You've already made that joke. I'll make it again if you keep giving me the material." He laughed. It came out of him strangely, rusty at the hinges, and she glanced up at the sound like she'd noticed something. "You don't do that a lot," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," he agreed, and did not elaborate. And she, to her enormous credit, though he had no frame of reference yet for how enormous that credit truly was, did not push. Not yet. By 8 there was a line at the counter, and Leopold discovered, with the same slow horror he'd applied to everything else that morning, that a line was a thing you were meant to stand in. "I do not understand why I cannot simply be served now," he said, low, to Pearl, while a woman with a stroller and a man in a suit both stood, unmoving, patient, several feet back from the register. "They are all here for the same thing I am here for. They got here after you finished folding boxes, and before you decided you wanted coffee. That's how lines work. You could simply wait your turn, Leo, like every other person who has ever wanted a coffee in the history of coffee. I have never waited my turn for anything. You one of the old families or something? Because that's exactly the energy the Wyckoffs give off, and none of them have stood in a line since 1911. I don't know what a Wyckoff is. Big vampire family, own half the county. Terrifying at the co-op on Saturdays. You'd fit right in, personality-wise." She said it the way you'd say it about any of the old money families, who quietly ran a small town, vampire or otherwise, and didn't appear to notice that he'd gone very quiet. "Well," Pearl said, not unkindly, sliding a to-go cup to the man in the suit. "There's a first for everything, and today appears to be your day for it." He waited. It took 4 minutes, which he would later describe, privately to no one, as among the longest 4 minutes of his very long life. Standing behind a stroller and in front of a retired postal worker named Hal, who wanted to discuss, at length, a dispute with the town council over a parking ordinance that Leopold found himself, against every instinct he possessed, actually listening to. "You've got opinions on parking ordinances?" Hal said, eyeing him. "I have opinions on a great many things I understand considerably less than I understand parking." "Huh, fair enough." The register itself was the next indignity. A young man with a bicycle wanted 2 coffees and a lemon scone, and he held a small black rectangle against a small silver rectangle, and the transaction simply completed. No coin changed hands, no ledger was marked. Leopold stared at this exchange the way he had once stared at a cannon. "What," he said, "was that?" "Card reader." Pearl didn't even look at it. "You tap, it charges you, you're on your way." "You've genuinely never seen this?" "I have seen many things. I have not seen money agree to move without anyone touching it." "Where have you been living? A cave?" "A castle," he said, which was true, and which she took correctly for a joke, and laughed at, which he found he wanted to hear again immediately. The tip jar sat at the end of the counter, hand-lettered, glass, half full of crumpled bills and loose change, and it took him until nearly 9 to work out what it was for. "They are paying you," he said slowly, "for something they have already agreed to pay for, voluntarily, on top of the agreed price." "That's tipping, yeah." "Why?" "Because I'm nice to them, and I get up at 4 and the coffee's good." "But they are not obligated." "Nope." "No one is making them." "Nope." He looked at the jar for a long moment, something working behind his face that Pearl couldn't read yet and wouldn't fully understand until much later. "I don't understand it," he said finally, quietly, and there was something underneath the words that had stopped being about the jar at all. Giving something no one can make you give. I have never. He stopped himself, started again, more carefully. It is an interesting system. It's not that deep, Leo. It's quarters. But she'd caught the last note of it anyway, the thing underneath the sentence, and filed it away without comment, the way she filed away everything that walked through her door before it made sense. Hal lingered near the door on his way out, cup in hand, and nodded back at the counter. "She ever take a day off, your friend there?" "I don't believe I know," Leopold said, and found, saying it, that he genuinely wanted to. 9 years running this place solo, near as I can tell. Her mother had it before her. Pearl was supposed to go do something fancy with it. Culinary school, I want to say, some program out east. And then her mom got sick, and that was that. Never left. Whole town runs on her not leaving, if you want the honest truth of it. And I don't know a soul who's ever thanked her properly for it. Hal shrugged, entirely unaware of the size of what he'd just handed over. Good coffee, though. He left. A woman came in behind him with a toddler on her hip, and the particular exhaustion of someone who had not slept a full night in recent memory, and Pearl had a warm roll wrapped and in the woman's free hand before an order had technically been placed. "You didn't ask what she wanted," Leopold observed, once the woman had gone. "Didn't need to. Sadie's been coming in every Wednesday for 4 months. Baby's teething. She wants the cinnamon roll, she wants it warm, and she wants someone to not ask her how she's holding up, because she's tired of answering that question badly." Pearl wiped down the counter without looking up. "You learn people's orders, you learn people, eventually. It's not a trick. It's just paying attention for longer than anybody expects you to. That is, I would argue, precisely a trick. A very good one. You noticed a great deal about me before I had said a word worth noticing. I noticed you looked like you'd never seen bread before, and might faint on my floor. That's not a trick. That's a liability I was managing. You are extremely committed to not being complimented. I'm extremely committed to running a bakery, Leo. Compliments don't proof the dough." But she was fighting a smile again, he noticed, the same one from the box folding, and he found himself cataloging it the way he'd cataloged the hunger, and the shoes, and the heartbeat. One more entirely new thing his body seemed determined to notice today. Leopold left the bakery, at Pearl's shrewd insistence, only twice. To ask Hal exactly what pattern to look for in the tip jar arithmetic, Hal, delighted to be consulted, produced a theory involving lunar cycles that Leopold suspected was nonsense and listened to in full, regardless. And once to stand in line again, on principle, for a coffee he did not particularly want, purely to confirm to himself that he could do it a second time without difficulty. He could. It was, in its small way, one of the more satisfying accomplishments of his very long life. At noon there was a lull, the kind that let a bakery breathe, and Pearl put him on dishes because his hands, whatever else was wrong with them today, were steady, and because she'd run out of things to hand a stranger that couldn't be ruined by enthusiasm alone. "You've really never washed a dish." "I have overseen the washing of many dishes." "That's not the same thing." "I am beginning to understand that." He was, in fact, terrible at it. Flooded the counter twice, broke exactly one saucer that had, he insisted, simply thrown itself at the floor. And somewhere in the third disaster, reaching to catch a falling mixing bowl before it followed the saucer's example, his hand closed over hers on the same handle, and they both went very still. Her hand was warm. That wasn't strange. Everyone's hands were warm to him, ordinarily, the way everyone's was warm compared to his own. What was strange was that his hand was warm too, now. Warm and slightly damp and entirely, humiliatingly human. And for one full second, neither of them moved, and the bowl sat safely on the counter, and the kitchen was very quiet. "You can let go of the bowl," Pearl said. Her voice had gone a half step lower than the rest of the day. "Yes," he said, and did not for another second, and then did. She turned back to the sink. He watched the back of her neck for slightly too long before he made himself stop. Something had happened to his face while he wasn't paying attention to it. Heat, high in the cheeks, entirely outside his control. A sensation he did not have a category for, because he had not experienced it since before there were words in his current vocabulary for it. "Are you all right?" Pearl asked, glancing back. "You've gone a color." "I am told," he said, with as much dignity as a man could muster, while visibly blushing for the first time in 300 years, "that this happens to people." "Yeah," she said, not unkindly, fighting a smile and losing. "It happens to people." Chapter 3. 4 in the morning. The bakery closed at 3. Leopold discovered at 3:15 that he had nowhere on earth to be. It should have alarmed him more than it did. He stood on the sidewalk outside Sutton's with the particular helplessness of a man who had, for 3 centuries, always had somewhere expected of him: a court, a chamber, a chair with his name carved into the wood of it, even in exile, and who now had $11, no phone, and a body that was beginning, quietly and insultingly, to want to lie down. Pearl found him still standing there when she came out to flip the sign. "You have got to be the worst prepared runaway I've ever met," she said. "Where's your car guy?" "Wendell. He is finding a tire. It is proving difficult." "And you don't have anywhere to—" She stopped, read something in his face, and sighed, the specific sigh of a woman about to make a decision she'd think about later. "I start tonight's dough around 10. Then I'm back at it at 3 to shape and proof before we open. Somebody's got to be here either way. You can sleep in the office chair or you can help. Those are the options." "I would prefer to help." "You say that like you know what it means." "I have watched you all day. I am confident I can approximate competence." "That's the most confident, wrong sentence I've heard all week." He did not, in fact, know what it meant, and by 10 that evening he had learned that it meant standing in a warm, flower-scented kitchen at an hour he would ordinarily have spent conducting the actual business of being a king, needing something that fought back against his hands in a way that felt, distressingly, like an argument he was slowly learning to win. "You're doing it too hard again," Pearl said, not looking up from her own bowl. "It's not a wrestling match." "Everything today has been a wrestling match." Dough remembers how it's treated. You push it too fast, before it's ready, it collapses on you, and then you're both back at the start, except now you're worse off than when you began, because you've used up the good flour proving a point nobody asked you to prove. She glanced at him, something dry and knowing in it. "You have to let it take the time it takes." He looked at her for a beat too long. "That is either extremely good advice about bread," he said, "or it is about something else entirely, and I cannot tell which, and I find I am afraid to ask." "It's about bread, Leo." A pause. "Mostly." "You said Hal told me your mother started this place." Her hands went still on the dough, just for a second, before resuming, slightly more deliberate than before. "Hal talks too much." "He seemed fond of you. Fondness makes people careless with information." "Yeah, well," she shrugged, a motion that cost her more than it looked like it did. "Mom had it 40 years. I was supposed to go to culinary school out east. Got in, even. Actual acceptance letter, actual scholarship. And then she got sick the summer before I was supposed to leave. And somebody had to run the ovens. And it turned out the somebody was me. And it just stayed being me. 9 years now." "Do you regret it?" "That's not really a question I let myself ask on a Tuesday." "It's not currently Tuesday." "It's never really Tuesday when I ask it, Leo. That's rather the point of not asking." She said it lightly, but there was an edge under the lightness, old and worn smooth from handling. "I love this place. I'm good at it. Whole town would fall over without their 4 a.m. coffee, and I like being the reason it doesn't. Nobody's ever once asked if I wanted to be needed this much. They just started needing me. And I let them, because saying no felt like something other people got to do." She glanced at him, something almost embarrassed in it. "That's the most I've said out loud about that in about 6 years, so." "Congratulations. You get the honest version of me at 4 in the morning, apparently. I understand that better than you might expect. Yeah? Being needed for a use, rather than chosen for a self. I have 300 years of experience being extremely necessary to a great many people who have never once asked whether I wanted to be. He looked at the dough under his hands, not at her. I don't think that's a small thing to have in common, actually. I think it might be the whole reason I'm still standing in this kitchen instead of asleep in your office chair. Pearl didn't answer that right away, and when she did, her voice had gone quiet in a way it hadn't been all night. Yeah, okay. Maybe it is. My grandmother turned, she said, apropos of not very much, wiping flour from her hands. 61 years old, buried 2 husbands, decided one December she wasn't done yet and went and found somebody willing. Took her the better part of a year to come all the way back from it. Couldn't be around any of us in daylight for months. Missed my cousin's wedding, missed my mother's funeral, actually, which is a thing this family has never fully forgiven her for, fairly or not. But she's still here. Runs a fishing charter out of the marina, of all things. Works nights. Outlived everybody who was ever cruel to her about it. She glanced at him. I'm not scared of the concept, Leo, if that's what you're bracing for. I've just watched what it actually costs, up close. And it's not the romantic kind of costly. It's Christmas mornings you don't get back. That is not remotely what I was bracing for. No? No. I was bracing for you to ask if I'd killed anyone. That is usually where this conversation goes, in my experience. Have you? Not recently. Fair enough. Ask me again at a decent hour, and I'll ask you that one properly. Around midnight, in the low hour when the ovens hummed and the street outside had gone entirely dark and entirely quiet, she set down her rolling pin and looked at him properly. Okay, wild guess. She held up a floury hand before he could object. You're a Wyckoff. This is some kind of family thing. Everybody in this town has strong opinions about Wyckoff business, and nobody will explain it to an outsider. And I should just let it go. I am not a Wyckoff. Ashfield, then, or one of the River families. I can never keep the River family straight. Pearl. I'm trying to make this easy for both of us. If you're one of them, I genuinely don't need the details. Half this town's been quietly vampire since before my grandmother turned, and nobody's ever once asked me to make it my business. I feed people. I don't interrogate them. It is not quite that simple. Nothing about you has been simple since 6 this morning. She crossed her arms, not unkindly. So what actually happened to you this morning? And don't say car trouble, because car trouble doesn't explain a man who didn't know what a tip jar was, or what a line was, or apparently what a back is for. He set down the dough. He had rehearsed no version of this conversation in 300 years, because in 300 years no one had ever gotten close enough to ask it and stayed close enough to hear the answer. There is a version of me, he said carefully, that is not available today. I don't know how else to say it honestly. Once a year, for one day, I am reduced to this, to exactly this, tired and hungry and bad at boxes and worse at lines. And then, tomorrow, I go back to being the other thing. And I don't remember in the moment what it was like to be this, because the two versions of me do not share a memory very well. I only know that every single time it ends, I am sorry to see it go, and every single time it begins, I am furious about it. And I have never once, in 300 years, told anyone what the day was actually like from the inside. So, that is the honest answer, and I understand it answers nothing. Pearl was quiet for a long moment, flour on her wrists, watching him with an expression he couldn't read yet. Not fear, not quite disbelief, something more patient than either. That's the strangest non-answer I've ever gotten, she said finally, and I run a bakery in a town where a man once tried to pay me in a live chicken. But okay, you don't have to tell me the rest tonight. You are remarkably calm about all of this. I've got flour under my nails and dough that won't wait, Leo. I don't have the bandwidth to be alarmed on top of it. Ask me again at a decent hour. He almost told her the rest anyway, right there. The whole 300 years of it. Agnes, the door he'd refused to open, the sister who hadn't made it through that winter, the curse that had followed like a debt collector every solstice since. And then the bell over the front door rang, absurdly, at nearly 1 a.m, and a man in an overcoat that cost more than the building came through it looking like he had aged a decade since dawn. "Sir," Wendell said, with the specific relief of a man who has canvassed 11 bakeries in a 40-mile radius with a hand-drawn description reading approximately 6 feet, dark hair, likely being rude to a barista. "Thank every power that still answers me. Nobody answers a bakery telephone before opening, sir, not one of the 11. So I was reduced to driving to each and knocking like some sort of door-to-door salesman of missing kings. Do you know what it is to explain that? 11 separate times to 11 separate strangers at this hour? I have been asked twice if I wanted to file a police report. I very nearly did. For you. I'm flattered. You are not permitted to be flattered. You are permitted to get in the car." Pearl, drying her hands on a towel, looked between them with open curiosity. "You must be the tire guy." "Wendell," said, with a stiff little bow that looked entirely reflexive and entirely out of place in a kitchen that smelled like proofing dough. "I do apologize for the hour, madam, and for whatever damage he has done to your establishment in the better part of a day left unsupervised. He broke one saucer and became emotionally attached to a tip jar. Could have been worse. With him, madam, it is astonishing how rarely it is not worse." Leopold straightened, and something shifted in his posture without his choosing it. Spine locking, chin lifting, 300 years of habit reasserting itself in the space of one breath. "Wendell, report." The tone came out before he could stop it. Flat, clipped, unmistakably a king addressing staff. And he heard it land in the room. Heard Pearl go very still behind the counter, and caught himself half a second too late. "The tire is fixed," Wendell said, faltering slightly at the shift in him, glancing between Leopold and the woman with flour on her wrists, like he was reading a report he hadn't been briefed on. "I can have you home within the hour. Sir, we should leave now before—" "No." Wendell blinked. "No? I am staying until it ends. Here. This time." Leopold heard himself say it, and understood distantly that he meant it more than he had meant anything in longer than he could easily calculate. "Wait outside if you must hover. I am not leaving." Wendell looked at him for a long moment, really looked, the way a man looks at someone he has served for 2 centuries and has never once seen do this. And then, wisely, said nothing at all, and withdrew to the car parked crookedly at the curb, where he would spend the next several hours checking his watch with escalating despair, and, at one point, composing and deleting the same text message to the house steward 4 separate times. Pearl set down her rolling pin. "Sir," she repeated slowly. "Report. You want to explain that part?" "Not yet," Leopold said. "Please, not yet. Let me finish being this a little longer." Something in his voice must have been honest enough because she studied him a moment longer and then went back to her dough and let him. Chapter 4. The Last Hour. By 4 a.m, the sky outside had gone from black to the particular deep blue that meant dawn was no longer a rumor, but an appointment, and Leopold felt it coming the way he had felt every one of the 300 endings before it, a tightening under the ribs, a countdown his body kept whether he asked it to or not. "You've gone quiet," Pearl said. She'd pulled 2 stools up to the cooling rack, and they sat with a tray of the day's first bread between them, steam still coming off the tops, the whole kitchen smelling like the inside of something good. "It ends soon," he said. "This version of me. I can feel it coming, the way you'd feel a storm." "How soon?" "Before the sun's fully up. 20 minutes, perhaps less." She didn't ask what happened after, which he noticed, and was grateful for, and dreaded in equal measure, because it meant she was choosing not to look away from something, rather than not seeing it at all. "I want to say something," he said. "And I would like to say it while I still have the nerve of a mortal man, because I promise you, the version of me that exists in 20 minutes has considerably less of it. Okay? No one has ever fed me because they wanted to, in 300 years. People have fed me because I commanded it, or feared what would happen if they didn't, or wanted something from the transaction that I could give them in return. You gave me a piece of bread because I looked hungry, before you knew my name, and it did not occur to you that there was any other option. And I have been trying all day to find a word for what that did to me, and I don't have one. So I am simply telling you, it did something." Pearl was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice had gone careful in a way it hadn't been all day. "I feed people because I feed people, Leo. It's not a whole philosophy." "I know, that's rather the point." "And for what it's worth," she added, quieter, "nobody's ever noticed that I don't take days off either. Not until you did, 12 hours into knowing me. So maybe we're even on the noticing." She looked at him, really looked, the way she had a habit of doing, unhurried, unimpressed by anything that hadn't earned the right to impress her, and something in her face softened past the point of pretending it hadn't. "For what it's worth," she said again, softer, "I wasn't going to let you sit there and starve. Doesn't matter who you turned out to be." "I am aware. That is exactly why I am telling you this now and not tomorrow." He leaned in. She met him halfway, and it was slow, and it tasted like burnt sugar and 4 in the morning, and for one full, complete second, it was the best thing that had happened to him in 300 years of counting. And then his hand, resting against her jaw, went cold. She felt it happen under her own fingers, the warmth draining out of him mid-breath, his pulse stuttering once beneath her palm where it had been steady a second before, and then gone entirely. Silence where a heartbeat had just been. She pulled back, startled, and watched the color leave his face in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with biology reversing itself in real time. His eyes, brown a moment ago, went dark at the edges, then amber, then something closer to old gold, and his shoulders, which had spent the whole day slightly wrong, slightly too soft, a king's posture worn like borrowed clothes, resettled into something else entirely. Something still. Something that did not need to breathe and had, for one unguarded second, forgotten to. "Leo?" "Leopold," he said, and his voice had dropped half an octave, gone quieter and older in the same breath. "My apologies. That is, this is the part I don't remember well, from the other side." "Your eyes just changed color." "Yes." "You just went cold under my hand." "Yes." "Your heart just—" "It does that," he said, gently, and there was something almost tender in how carefully he said it, watching her absorb it without flinching. "It will not do it again for another year." She stood up fast enough to knock her stool back, putting the width of the kitchen island between them. Not fear exactly, he would understand later, but the particular scramble of a person's whole understanding of a day recalibrating itself all at once. And it was in that moment, with the sky outside going the pale gray gold that would soon be dangerous to him again, that the bell over the front door rang. An elderly woman stood in the doorway. Leopold knew her instantly, the way you know a debt the moment someone clears their throat about it. "Agnes," he said. Pearl looked between them. "You two know each other?" "She's been coming in every morning for a week," Pearl said slowly, working it out even as she said it. "Table by the window. Tea, no sugar. I thought she just liked the light." "I like the light very much," Agnes agreed, stepping inside, letting the door swing shut behind her. She looked, Leopold thought, exactly as she had 300 years ago, in the particular way that meant she had chosen to. I have had 300 years to develop opinions about which mornings are worth watching. This one, I confess, I did not want to miss. "You've been watching the whole day," Leopold said. It wasn't a question. "You knew where I'd land." "I did not know. I hoped. Something crossed her face, old and complicated. You have never once, in 3 centuries, stayed for the ending, Leopold. You have run from it every single time. Back to your castle, back to your grief, back to the version of yourself that does not have to feel it. And I have watched you do it every year and thought, he has learned nothing. And then I watched you send your man away tonight and tell him to wait. She looked at Pearl for a long moment, something unreadable in it. So, perhaps something, finally. What is this? Pearl said, very evenly, in the voice of a woman who had spent an entire day accepting increasingly impossible things and had reached her limit on doing it without an explanation. Somebody tell me what this actually is. Leopold looked at Agnes. Agnes looked back at him and did not answer for him, which he understood, correctly, as its own kind of mercy. She was leaving it to him to say it, finally, out loud, to someone other than himself. 300 years ago, he said, a woman came to my door in the worst winter my kingdom had seen in a generation. She asked for shelter and bread for her dying sister. I was young and cruel in the specific, careless way of men who have never once gone hungry, and I had her turned away without seeing her myself. Her sister died 3 days later. He looked at Agnes. I have had 300 years, and I have never once said that sentence out loud to anyone but myself. Her sister, Pearl said slowly, was hers. Mine, Agnes confirmed. I was not yet what I am now. I became it shortly after, out of grief, and out of a very specific kind of fury. And the first thing I did with the power was make sure he would never again forget what it costs to be turned away hungry from someone else's door. She looked at Leopold, not unkindly, but not gently either. Once a year, every solstice, I wanted you to feel it in your own body, since you could not seem to feel it any other way. And has he? Pearl asked. Felt it? Every single time, Agnes said. And every single time, he has run from the feeling the moment it ended, back into the man who could afford not to have felt it at all. She turned to Leopold. Until today. Your kingdom, Pearl said slowly. You said your kingdom. She looked between the two of them, something recalibrating fast behind her eyes. You're not just one of the Wyckoffs. You're not just some old family with a strange tradition. You're... She stopped, like the word cost something to say out loud. You're the king. The actual one. The one they named the treaties after. Yes, Leopold said. I made you fold boxes. You did. I put you on dishes. You did that too. I broke a saucer. You've spent all day apologizing to me for breaking a saucer, and you rule an entire... She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for a second, breathed out. Okay. That is a considerably bigger thing than I had budgeted for at 4 a.m. Okay. Pearl dropped her hands and held one up, and something in the flatness of her voice made both of them stop and actually look at her. I've got a question, and it's not for him. It's for you. She looked straight at Agnes. You said this was never for you to grant or refuse anymore, that it's between me and him now. But you're the one standing in my kitchen at 4 a.m, making sure I heard the whole speech before I got a vote. So which is it? Are you done deciding things for people? Or are you just deciding this one thing a little more quietly than usual? Agnes went very still, not unlike, Leopold thought, the way he himself went still, though she would never have called it that. That is a fair question, she said after a moment. I've got a business to run, and about 90 seconds before the sun makes this whole conversation dangerous for him. So I'd like a fair answer. I came to see if he had finally learned the thing I have spent 300 years trying to teach him. I did not come to approve or disapprove of you. I have no standing to do either. Agnes's mouth curved, something almost rueful in it. You are quite right to call that out. Old habits. I have been managing this man's education for 3 centuries. It is difficult to stop mid-lesson. Good, Pearl said. Then don't let it be your call. It's mine. And his. Not yours, whatever you started 300 years ago. She turned to Leopold, and her voice gentled, just slightly, though the steel underneath it didn't fully go. That's all I wanted to say. Now somebody tell me what happens to you in the next 5 minutes, because the sky's doing a thing I don't like the look of. The sky outside had gone gold at the edges. Leopold could feel it now, the old wrongness of it, the danger returning to his skin like a held breath finally released. And he knew, with the particular clarity of a man out of time, that whatever he said next would matter more than anything he'd said in 3 centuries. I don't want it to end the way it always ends, he said. I don't want to go home and forget this by winter. I want... He looked at Pearl, and for the first time all day, all 300 years, he simply said the true thing, without managing it, without performing it. I want to come back. Not cursed, not stranded, on purpose. Pearl didn't answer right away. She was looking at Leopold, really looking, the way she had all day, except now everything she saw meant something different than it had an hour ago. I need you to leave, she said finally, quietly. Not to Agnes, to him, both of you. I need to think, and the sun's coming up, and you... Her voice caught just slightly. You need to not be standing in my kitchen when it does. Leopold felt something in his chest that had nothing to do with the return of a heartbeat he no longer had. Pearl. Go, Leo. Her voice was steady even as her eyes weren't. Please. He went. Wendell was waiting at the curb with the car running, and the particular relief-tinged panic of a man who had watched the whole thing through the window and understood approximately none of it. And Leopold got in without a word and did not look back at the bakery until they were 3 streets away, at which point it was, of course, too late. Chapter 5. Open at 6. He did not go home. He told Wendell to drive, and then to keep driving. And somewhere around noon he told him where, and Wendell, to his very great credit, asked no questions, only turned the car around and pointed it toward the county archive 2 towns over, the one that still kept parish records going back further than most kingdoms. It took him the better part of 2 days. You could simply write to her, Wendell tried, on the second afternoon, watching Leopold cross-reference a ledger of parish burials with the specific, grim patience of a man who had once conducted actual wars with less determination. A letter, flowers, something that does not require you to burn. A letter is a thing anyone can write. I have written letters my entire life. I have written letters instead of showing up more times than I would like to count, and every single one of them was, in its own quiet way, a coward's version of an apology. Sir, respectfully, you could also simply not catch fire. Respectfully, Wendell, that is precisely what I intend to do the least amount of. By the second evening, hunched over a ledger of parish burials in a reading room that smelled of dust and older dust, Wendell found the entry before Leopold did. Sir? Wendell turned the book around, one gloved finger against a line of faded ink. Marion, no surname listed. Just sister to A of the Weaver's Row. Age 19. Cause of death, fever, complicated by exposure. Date matches the winter you described, to the week. Leopold read it 3 times before he trusted himself to speak. Exposure. Not fever alone. Exposure. She was turned away from shelter, sir. I imagine that's precisely what exposure means in a ledger like this. There's no grave reference. No, sir. The churchyard in question is, as of 1961, a parking lot behind a hardware store. I checked before we left the car. Leopold sat back, the book heavy on the table in front of him. 300 years of a debt suddenly reduced to 9 words in faded ink, and a woman's age. There's nothing left of her, Wendell. Nothing to visit. Nothing to fix. There is one thing, sir, if you're willing to spend an absurd sum of money on a fund nobody has touched since the Napoleonic Wars. Wendell slid a second ledger across the table. Property and trust records. This one considerably better kept. The Weavers Guild Fund. Technically still active. Technically still yours to reactivate, given your family's original charter obligations, which I looked up in the car while you were being dramatic about the burial register. Reactivate it for what? For exactly the kind of person Marion was, sir. Apprentices with nowhere to go in a hard winter. Shelter and bread, guaranteed. No one turned away from the door. Wendell said it carefully, watching him. It won't undo it. I want to be honest with you about that, since no one else in 300 years has bothered to be. It will not undo it. I know that. I only mean, I don't want you doing this because you think it buys you something with her. Agnes, or the other one. It doesn't buy anything. It's just the thing that should have happened 300 years ago and didn't. Leopold looked at the ledger for a long moment. That is, I think, precisely why I want to do it. It took the better part of the next day, solicitors woken at unreasonable hours, seals broken on documents that hadn't seen daylight since a war Leopold had fought in personally, more money moved in an afternoon than the town of Millhaven likely saw in a decade. But by evening, the fund existed again, under Marion's name, exactly as it should have 3 centuries before. You're not going to tell Agnes, Wendell said, watching him seal the last letter. No. She'll find out anyway. She's a witch, sir, not incurious. I know that, too. Leopold set the letter aside. I'd simply rather she find it than be shown it. There's a difference, I think, in what it means. On the third morning, he stood outside Sutton's Bakery at 5:58 in the morning, in the version of himself that did not get a holiday from consequences. The version for whom the sky going gold at the edges was not a joke the curse had saved for later, but the oldest and most reliable danger he owned. He had a coat. He had, at Wendell's near-tearful insistence, several layers of coat, and gloves, and a hat with a brim wide enough to embarrass a much younger man. And it would not be enough. Not for more than a minute or two of direct exposure, and both of them knew it. This is an extremely bad idea, Wendell said, parked at the curb, hands white on the wheel. I would like that noted formally. Noted. If you catch fire, I am not equipped to, Wendell. I am simply saying I brought a blanket, and I do not think a blanket is going to, Wendell. Leopold looked at him, and something steadied in his face. 300 years of composure arriving not as armor this time, but as its own kind of calm. I know what I am risking. I have known it since I left her kitchen. Wait here, and Wendell, thank you, for the wallet, and the map. And $11 you will notice I still have not repaid you. I will add it to the ledger, sir. It is a very long ledger. He got out of the car at 5:59. The sun cleared the tree line at 6 exactly, and it hurt exactly as much as it always had. A bright physical wrongness across every inch of exposed skin, his hand already blistering red at the wrist where the coat sleeve had ridden up, his eyes streaming even behind the dark glasses Wendell had produced from somewhere with the grim efficiency of a man who had clearly thought about this contingency longer than he'd let on. He made it to the awning over the bakery door in 11 steps that felt considerably longer, and stood in the thin strip of shade it offered, breathing hard, waiting. The door opened from the inside before he could knock. Pearl stood there in her flour-dusted apron, the open sign not yet flipped, staring at him. At the blistered wrist, the streaming eyes, the coat he'd clearly put on like armor and worn like a man walking into a fire anyway. And something in her face went from shock to fury to something else entirely in the space of about 2 seconds. Get inside, she said, already hauling him by the sleeve into the shadowed interior, kicking the door shut behind them both. Are you out of your mind? What is wrong with you? I wanted you to see, he said, breathless, cradling the burned wrist against his chest, what it actually costs. Not the curse version, the real one. I did not want to say it to you again with none of it on the line. You could have just called. I don't have a phone. You could have... She stopped, looked at him properly, really looked, taking in the whole ridiculous, blistered, 300-year-old truth of him, standing in her kitchen at 6 a.m, having chosen, on purpose, to hurt for her. Something in her face cracked open. You absolute idiot. I have been called worse by better people. I need ice. Sit down. Sit. She was already moving, pulling a chair out, pushing him into it with the same brisk economy she'd used on a mixing bowl 3 days ago. And it was, he thought, watching her work, an extremely undignified way for a king to be handled, and he did not want it to stop. I found her, he said, while she pressed a cloth-wrapped bag of ice against his wrist, with more gentleness than the roughness of her hands suggested she'd allow. Marion, Agnes's sister. There's a fund now, in her name, for exactly the kind of thing she needed and didn't get. Pearl's hands stilled on his wrist. That's not a grand gesture, Pearl. I'm not telling you this to be forgiven. I'm telling you because it needed doing, regardless of what you decide about the rest of it, and I did not want to be the kind of man who only does the right thing when someone is watching. She was quiet for a long moment, working the ice against the burn with careful hands, and when she finally spoke, her voice had gone rough at the edges. I've spent 2 days thinking about a man I met for 24 hours, she said. I run a bakery. I get up at 4. I've got a whole life here that doesn't have room in it for whatever you actually are. And I know that, and I've said it to myself about 40 times, and none of it made the thinking stop. I'm not asking you to have room for what I am, he said. I'm asking if there's room for the version of me that showed up here at 6 a.m. and burned his own hand off just to prove he meant it. Pearl laughed, a short, disbelieving sound, half wet, and set the ice down. I'm not going to be your one guaranteed day a year, she said. I want to be clear about that. If this is a thing, it's not a thing where I get 24 hours and then 364 days of missing you. No, he agreed. It wouldn't be that. I would come at night. Properly. The way anyone comes to see anyone, except considerably later and with more coats. A pause. And once a year, on the solstice, I would be exactly what I was 3 days ago. Tired. Bad at boxes. Bad at lines. Yours for a whole ordinary day, the way I have never once let myself be anyone's. And the rest of the year? The rest of the year, I am what I am. Cold hands, no heartbeat. A face that does not blush, which I understand you will miss, because I have been informed I did it rather a lot. You did, she said. It was extremely funny. I am aware. He looked at her, steady now, the ache in his wrist a distant thing beside the much larger ache he'd been carrying around for 3 days. I am not offering to become mortal for you, Pearl. I don't think that's the right ending, and I don't think you're asking for it. I am offering exactly what I am, on the terms I actually have, and asking whether that's something you could build a life around. One solstice and several hundred ordinary nights at a time. The bell over the door rang. Neither of them looked at it. It was 6:04, and Hal was standing confused in the doorway at a bakery that was very clearly still closed. And Pearl, without taking her eyes off Leopold, called out, "Give us a minute, Hal, and yes, you'll have to wait in line like everyone else." And the door swung shut again, and Hal, wisely, waited outside, grumbling something about parking ordinances to no one. "Okay," Pearl said finally. "Okay?" "Okay, yes, I'm in. I'm not saying I understand the whole heartbeat thing, or the eyes, or whatever Agnes actually is, but I understand a man who burned his own wrist to prove a point, and I understand that fund you set up without telling me you were going to tell me, and I understand..." She stopped, exhaled, started again more simply. "I like you, Leo. Whatever the rest of the year looks like. I like you." He kissed her then, careful of the ice pack still clutched between them, and it tasted, this time, like burnt sugar and antiseptic, and something that felt suspiciously like the beginning of a habit he intended to keep for a very long time. Later, much later, the open sign finally flipped, Hal fed and gone, the morning rush come and mostly through. She found him in the back kitchen with his sleeve rolled up over the bandaged wrist, watching the bread cool with an attention that had nothing to do with hunger. "You don't have to keep helping," she said. "You're not on payroll." "I want to." He looked at her, and something in his face had settled, finally, into a shape that didn't look borrowed anymore. "There is one more thing. I would like to ask you something, and I would like you to say no if the answer is no, because I have had 300 years to learn what it costs to take something instead of asking for it." "Okay." "I would like to feed properly. From you. Once, tonight, if you're willing, not because I need it tonight specifically, but because I have never once done it with someone who offered first, and I find I would like my first time doing it that way to be with you." He held up his uninjured wrist, echoing the gesture without quite meaning to. "Here, not the throat. Small. You would feel almost nothing." Pearl considered this with the same unhurried care she gave everything, weighing it the way she weighed flour, and then held out her own wrist, turned upward, steady. "Once," she said, "and you tell me if it's supposed to feel like anything because I want a warning." "It will feel," he said, very quietly, taking her hand in both of his like it was the most fragile thing he'd held in 300 years. "Like being known. That's the honest answer. I don't have a better one." It was, when it happened, nothing like she'd braced for. No pain, only a strange, warm pull, gone in seconds, and the way his whole body went still around it, careful, restrained, like a man holding a full cup with steady hands. And after, he pressed his mouth once, gently, to the place where her pulse still beat, in something that was less an ending than a promise to come back to it. "Thank you," he said, and meant it in a way that went considerably deeper than the words could carry. "You're welcome." She flexed her wrist, curious, unbothered. "That's it? That's the big scary vampire thing?" "That is the big scary vampire thing." "Overrated. I've had worse paper cuts." That was the start of the ordinary shape their life took. After. He came most nights, properly, the way he'd promised, arriving after dark with steadily improving hands and stubbornly terrible instincts about who took cream in their coffee. Wendell stopped hovering audibly by the third week. Hal decided, on no real evidence, that Leopold was basically harmless, and told the whole co-op so. It was the better part of a month before Pearl asked the question she'd apparently been turning over since the night of the feeding, and when she finally did, she asked it the way she asked everything, directly, over dough, at an hour most people would call unreasonable. "Can I ask you something now?" "Anything." "When my grandmother turned, it was her choice. Nobody talked her into it, nobody talked her out of it. She just decided, alone, on a Tuesday, and told the family after." Pearl looked up at him, steady, none of the earlier waver in it. "I don't want the version of this where I get a king 264 nights a year, and a mortal woman for one weird Tuesday in June, getting older every year while you stand there being polite about watching it happen. I've watched people be polite about watching me disappear a little at a time, my whole life. I did it to my own mother at the end, without meaning to. I'm not doing it to myself." Leopold went very still, the old kind, the kind she'd learned to read over one very long day. "Pearl, I'm not finished. I have spent my whole life being needed by people who never once asked if I wanted to be. This is the first enormous thing I have ever gotten to choose entirely for myself, and I would like it noted that I am choosing it wide awake, with both eyes open, having watched exactly what it costs, up close, for years. I know I don't get this year's Christmas back, or maybe next year's either. I know the bakery opens at 6 either way, and one of us is going to have to figure out what 6 means going forward. I know all of it. I'm asking anyway." "I don't want you to ask because of me," he said low. "I have watched mortals grow old before, Pearl. Different people, different centuries. I told myself every time that if I were ever given the chance again, I would not let anyone make that choice for my sake. I need this to be yours. Not a gift to me. Not a repair for what I am. It's not for you. Her voice didn't waver. It's for the woman who gets to run this place for the next 300 years, instead of the next 40, and actually gets to choose who she spends them with, instead of just whoever happened to still be standing when she looked up. That's for me, Leo. You're just lucky you're the one I want standing there. He looked at her for a long moment, the particular long moment of a man who has been offered something he has spent 3 centuries convinced he did not deserve to want. And something in his face finally, entirely, stopped performing anything at all. Then yes, he said, if you're certain. I'm certain. It will hurt. I won't lie to you about that. Not tonight, not ever again. There is a version of the next several days that will feel like losing something before it feels like gaining anything at all. You will not see daylight for a while. You will not be entirely yourself for longer than either of us would like. I know, I did the math already. I'm still asking. He took her hand again, the way he had for the feeding, except this time he turned his own wrist over as well, offering it, and there was nothing careful or performed left in either of them. Only 2 people choosing, deliberately, in full knowledge of the cost, to become something neither of them would have been able to explain to the people they used to be. Tell me if you want to stop, he said. At any point. I mean that. I know you do. That's rather the whole reason I'm still here. Chapter 6. 6 in the evening. 6 weeks later, the open sign on Sutton's front window flipped at 6 o'clock exactly, the way it always had. Except it was 6 in the evening now, not 6 in the morning, and the smell of bread rolled out into a street gone blue and quiet with early dark. And Hal, who had adjusted to the new hours with considerably more grace than anyone had expected, was first through the door as always, grumbling amiably about a parking ordinance that had still not resolved itself and, by every indication, never would. Evening, Hal. Evening. You look good. Both of you look good. He eyed Leopold, elbow deep in a mixing bowl with the unhurried competence of a man who had finally stopped fighting the dough. Still bad at the register? Considerably improved, Leopold said without looking up. I have mastered the tap to pay. He has not, Pearl said. He charged Sadie for a lemon scone and, we believe, a small principality last Tuesday. We're still sorting it out with the bank. It was one time. It was memorable. The ovens ran warm through the night now, the way they always had, just tuned to a different clock. And somewhere past midnight, when the street outside had gone entirely dark and entirely quiet, and the last of the evening's bread had gone into the case, Leopold Fairfax stood at the window of a bakery in a town he had once wandered into by accident, watched the last color drain from the sky without a flicker of the old dread, and reached for his wife's cold hand with his own. 611 years old, and for the first time in every one of them, he was exactly where he meant to be, on a night he had chosen on purpose, counting down to nothing at all.